The emotional hook that makes people say yes too quickly. There is a moment in every conversation where logic steps aside and emotion takes control. Most people don't even notice when it happens. They just feel it. A slight pressure, a subtle urgency, a quiet pull toward agreement. And before they have time to think, they say yes. This is not random. It is not accidental. It is a psychological trigger, a pattern, a mechanism that has been used in sales, relationships, leadership, and manipulation for decades. And once you understand it, you begin to see it everywhere. The emotional hook that makes people say yes too quickly does not rely on force. It does not argue. It does not debate. It creates a feeling. And that feeling bypasses critical thinking. At its core, this hook works by activating what psychologists call emotional urgency. When a person feels emotionally engaged and slightly pressured at the same time, the brain shifts from analytical processing to fast decision-making. This is where mistakes happen. This is where control is lost. Think about the last time you agreed to something and later questioned your decision. In most cases, you did not lack intelligence. You lacked time to think. Or more precisely, you were not given the space to think clearly. The emotional hook often begins with connection. The other person builds a sense of understanding. They mirror your tone. They align with your perspective. They make you feel seen. This creates trust very quickly. But this trust is not always genuine. It can be engineered. Once that connection is established, the second step is subtle escalation. The conversation shifts slightly. There is a suggestion, a request, a proposal, but it is framed in a way that feels emotionally consistent with the connection that was just created. This is important, because people are far more likely to agree when the request feels like a natural continuation of the emotional state they are already in. For example, if someone makes you feel understood and valued, and then asks for something that appears reasonable within that emotional context, your resistance drops. You are not evaluating the request independently. You are responding to the feeling. Then comes the critical element, timing. The request is made quickly, before your mind has the chance to switch back into analytical mode. This is the moment where the emotional hook is fully activated. And here is what most people do not realize. The brain prefers consistency. When you are in an emotional state, your brain tries to maintain that state. So when a request appears that aligns with that feeling, saying yes feels easier than stopping and questioning. This is why phrases like, "I know you're someone who values honesty," or "you seem like a person who understands," are so powerful. They create an identity-based emotional frame. And once you accept that frame, you feel internal pressure to act consistently with it. Now combine this with urgency, a slight time pressure, not extreme, just enough to prevent deep thinking. We need to decide now. This opportunity won't last. It's just a quick yes or no. At this point, the emotional hook is complete. Connection, alignment, identity, and urgency. And the result is predictable. People say yes, not because they fully agree, but because the emotional environment has been carefully constructed to guide them there. This mechanism is used everywhere, in negotiations, in relationships, in leadership, even in everyday conversations. And once you become aware of it, you begin to recognize a pattern. You start to notice when someone is moving too fast, when the emotional tone shifts quickly, when a request appears before you have had time to think. And that awareness is the first step toward control. Understanding the emotional hook is not enough, because recognizing it in theory is very different from resisting it in real time. The challenge is not knowledge. The challenge is interruption. When the emotional hook is activated, your brain is already moving fast. It is already leaning toward agreement. So the only way to regain control is to slow the process down, deliberately. The most powerful response you can use is simple. You pause. Silence is one of the strongest forms of resistance. When you do not respond immediately, you break the emotional momentum. You force the conversation back into a neutral state. This is uncomfortable for many people because silence feels like tension. But that tension is exactly what gives you space to think. Another key technique is to separate emotion from decision. Instead of responding within the emotional frame, you step outside of it. You ask yourself a simple question. If this situation had no emotional pressure, would I still say yes? This question disrupts the pattern. It forces your brain to re-engage analytical thinking, and often the answer changes. You can also use time as a tool. Any request that requires an immediate decision should be questioned, not rejected automatically, but paused. Saying, "I'll think about it," is not weakness. It is control. It signals that you are not operating under emotional pressure, and it removes the urgency that the other person may be relying on. There is also a deeper layer to this. The emotional hook works because people want to maintain harmony. They want to avoid conflict. They want to be seen as agreeable, cooperative, and consistent. So when someone creates an emotional connection and then presents a request, saying no feels like breaking that connection. It feels uncomfortable, even when it is the correct decision. This is why awareness alone is not enough. You must become comfortable with that discomfort, because the ability to say no is directly linked to your ability to tolerate emotional tension. The more you practice this, the more you begin to see a shift. Conversations slow down, decisions become clearer, and you stop reacting automatically. You begin to respond intentionally. There is also something important to understand about the people who use this technique. Not all of them are manipulative in a negative sense. Some are simply skilled communicators. They understand human behavior. They know how to guide conversations. But the effect is the same. If you are not aware, you lose control of your decisions. So the goal is not to become defensive or suspicious of every interaction. The goal is to remain conscious, to notice when emotions are being used to accelerate agreement. Because once you see it, you can choose differently. And that is where your power returns. The emotional hook only works when it goes unnoticed. It depends on speed, on feeling, on automatic response. The moment you slow it down, the moment you question it, the moment you pause, the entire mechanism weakens. And in that moment, you are no longer being guided. You are deciding. That is the difference between reacting and thinking, between influence and control. And once you understand this, you will never say yes the same way again.